Hi, I'm going to talk about this word originally that I think is freighted with ideology, and I wish people would think more about that ideology when they use it. Um, so, originally is often used in connection with particular words or cultural practices to talk about the way they were before. Um, and the word originally sort of smuggles in this idea of a point of origin, right? People ask, what did this word originally mean? Or what did apple pie originally look like, right? What was ice cream originally? And for some of those things, there really might be a point of origin where we could nail down, 1873, the first ice cream cone ever was made and it looked like this. But for a lot of practices, a lot of culture, a lot of language, that's just not possible, but we still use this word originally as if it were possible. But first, a quick note about meanings. When we say a word means something, and we meaning mostly linguists, but really anyone who's really thought about it, and linguists think about it the most, right? What a word means. When we talk about what a word means, we talk about what people think a word means, and that's really one and the same, okay? When we say a word has meaning, and that meaning has changed, we just mean people's idea of a word has changed. And that sounds like I'm positing a objective reality that people think about and maybe could be wrong about, but actually people's thoughts are all that matters when it comes to words. And if you only look at what people think about a word and you study that enough, you start to realize that it doesn't matter whether there is an objective reality that words really mean certain things in like objectively, because people would have no access to that information, and so they have no choice but to co-construct their own meanings of words. That is to say, and kind of in a long-winded and obtuse way, that words are socially constructed, and that the meanings of words are just what people think the meanings are. Okay, so when we say the meaning of a word has changed, we mean at one point a lot of people thought the word meant this, and now people think the word means this, and in both cases they were right, because that's the only way that we can assess what a word means is what people think about it. You can think of a word's meaning, or really any kind of social construction, as being kind of like harmony, which by definition needs the work of more than one person to exist. And it's not as if it exists and other people contribute to it. It's that it doesn't exist until people contribute to it. More than one person contributes to it. And socially constructed phenomena are the same thing. So, um, on to the word original. So, my problem with the word original is that it smuggles in some ideas of, first of all, the idea of a point of origin, which is mostly false. It also smuggles in the ideas of whose idea counts as the point of origin for a particular idea or a particular word, and when, and let's see, which cultures have the right or the privilege to tell other cultures what words really mean, right? Um, in some cases, this is by accident, and in some cases, it feels intentional or it feels like it could be otherwise. Um, the way that it can happen by accident, that we can end up privileging certain perspectives and certain types of people's opinions on language more than others by accident, is because the further you go back in time, so for example, if we're looking for a historical source on the meaning of a particular word, like the word like, right? Um, 500 years ago, the people who could write and leave evidence of what the word like meant were a very small part of the population, and then even more so 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago. So, because of that, we're privileging the perspectives. Why can't I talk? Perspectives of people who were literate, who were therefore educated, part of an educated caste or an educated class, people who could afford pens and paper, etc. And then also what those people thought was important to write, um, which is probably different from what they talked about, right? The same way that we don't write down everything that we say nowadays. We record it and put it on YouTube. Um, so that has the effect of privileging the perspectives of the educated and the moneyed, um, but it's really just a result of those were the people who were able to write stuff down back in time. Um, nowadays, you still see people privileging perspectives and privileging certain groups or certain periods of time with the right to set the meaning of a word, or the right to set the correct form of a cultural practice, that are not dependent on technology. So the next few slides are examples of that, of people privileging certain perspectives and certain people and certain ideas of the way words and cultural practices should be for reasons that are not just, uh, analogous to finding dinosaur fossils, right? Okay. So the first way that people use originally and is a problem mostly by the misleading analogy that it produces, is to use it for a word or a cultural practice and analogize it implicitly to a physical cultural product like a castle or the pyramids or something like that, that really was created by collaborative effort, although collaborative might be a word you have to take with a grain of salt in the case of something like the pyramids, um, and really was done at some point and was in its best state soon after it was done, and then gradually wore down and was degraded over time. Um, I think we can use the word without too much unwelcome ideology, use the word originally to describe something like the pyramids and what the pyramids originally looked like, um, fairly, but it's not correct to use it with this sense in response. Sorry, to describe words or many other cultural practices, because often what we're taking as the original form of a word is the result of the same forces that changed the word after it was recorded in that state. So take a Latin word like decimate. Is that Latin? I'm pretty sure it is. Which people, often will say, oh, it means to kill 1/10, not to kill a lot, as it currently means. Um, the word evolved from a previous form into that state in which it was recorded, and then continued evolving after that. And the fact that it was recorded in this state does not mean that it's analogous to the pyramids, where it was perfect in that state and then has only gotten worse over time since then. If anything, it's analogous to a snapshot of the pyramids in mid-degradation, um, and we don't know what it was before that, because we only have as our point of origin the recorded usage where it means killing 1/10, right? Um, and people often use originally in reference to words that are of Latin origin, like exactly in this way, sort of implying that the Latin usage that was recorded sometime during, the minus first to third centuries, um, as the correct usage, which has somehow become vulgar over time. And for the reasons I explained, that analogy doesn't hold up. A word is not a building, right? And another way that people use the word originally, sort of similar to the first way, is to describe a word or a practice as the property of the upper classes, and the upper classes continue to have the last word on how that word should be used. So take, as an example of a cultural practice, take kimono, and people will talk about kimono nowadays because there exist cheaper ways to make kimono, which, before were quite laborious to make and therefore really expensive. But some people dislike these new ways of making kimono because they're different, first of all, and also they make kimono more cheap and available to a wider variety of people. And the way people use the word originally to refer to cultural practices is to refer to the time before that process began, before the process of, I guess you might call, massization, generalization. I don't know what you call that. Secularization began. And of course, just like we saw with the Latin origin words, kimono did not originally exist in 1850, and then everything after that is a corruption of that perfect product. that garment evolved up till that point, and then evolved in some slightly different ways after that. But there's no reason to pick the last time that the upper class had sole exclusive use of this product as the point of origin of it, right? It didn't originate then, it originated far before, or really came to be through various processes far before. Even though using the word originate is kind of misleading when it comes to some products and practices. So, here we see, by the way, I have some example sentences of originally being used in the ways that I'm talking about, which I got from Coca, like everything I get from Coca. So another way that people use the word originally, and this way is even more solipsistic than the others, is to posit the moment that the speaker was born as the origin of something. So like people say, Disney movies were originally for kids, right? Or let's see, kids were originally allowed to play outside a lot more. And the point that I'm choosing as the point of origin of, you know, the amount of freedom that children have, like the state of that American cultural practice, is the moment that I was born. Um, and obviously, this is very, uh, let's see, self-centered, a way of using originally. Um, and sometimes people will pick, this is sort of overlapping with the last slide, but people will pick a more, sort of a more nationalist or chauvinist definition of this arbitrary point in time that things originate to. I put "When America Was Great" sort of as a tongue-in-cheek joke. My attempt to be topical. So another way that people use originally is to describe the point at which a word entered the English language when they're talking about a word. They can also do this for cultural practices. But like when we say the word algebra was originally, actually this is algorithm. The term originally meant arithmetic. They're choosing as the point of origin the moment, and it's probably not properly described as a moment at all, but the moment that someone who spoke Arabic told someone who spoke English what this word was. And then we take that as the point of origin of this word in English, right? And what's a little bit misleading about this is that often the way we define that, the definition of that word in its language of origin is colored by what we think about that culture now, right? So when we say, taking Japanese and Chinese as an example, people will often say this word in Japanese was originally pronounced, and then they give you the pronunciation in modern Chinese, which was not the origin of modern Japanese. Both Japanese and Chinese have continued to evolve from the point where Chinese was feeding a ton of new words into Japanese, right? And that's the way that this usage of originally can be problematic, in addition to the fact that, like the other examples we discussed, the word algorithm in Arabic, or all those words in Chinese that became words in Japanese, had evolved up until that point too. There's nothing original about that point, aside from the fact that, from the perspective of Japanese or English, that's the point of contact, right? But it's not the point of origin for that word, because that word existed before and continued to exist afterward in regularly evolving forms. So in conclusion, the word originally is arbitrary in the people, the groups, the cultures, the times that it chooses as its point of origin for a particular practice or a particular word. To the extent that it's not arbitrary, it's reflecting some ideology that we're bringing to the table. So what points we choose as the origin of a word or a cultural practice often say a lot about what we think of the world now, not what was true at the time that that word was coined. And, again, words, for the most part, we don't know when words were coined. So it can be misleading in these ways. First of all, the origin is often just a snapshot from the middle of that word's evolution, right? The the origin can often be from an unrepresentative sample. For example, the origin is taken from a piece of writing when only a few people could write. Um, the origin often implies a state of completion after which a word or a cultural practice has degraded, when that's not true of cultural practices or words. Um, and often the origin is with a group that we give the authority to decide correct usage. I didn't really talk about that, did I? So when we take, I guess kimono is a good example of this actually. Um, when we choose which words or cultural practices define our group, um, so in Japan, the kimono is pretty famous, a pretty famous example of Japanese culture, like big C culture around the world. And other well-known examples are things like samurai or ninja or sushi. Sushi, I'm not actually sure about, but the other ones were never known or practiced by more than a tiny minority. Well, samurai were known, but they weren't. Most people were not samurai. Most people were farmers whose lives were controlled by samurai. Um, so the elevation of those groups and the practices of those groups, including kimono and geisha and things like that, to national culture is a matter of choosing which groups out of that society we like the best, which groups we decide to, grant the authority to decide what's correct for everyone else, right? Um, so when we say a word originates with Webster, right, or a cultural practice originates with, French nobility or something like that, we're ceding to that group the ability to decide what we think is objectively true about our world now. Okay, some stumbles, but I hope that made sense.